Well, welcome everyone. We still have a few people arriving, but as you walked across the meadow to this place, I hope you really felt that separation of all the other stuff going on and the arrival at this place. So welcome, and I'll introduce the speaker in a minute, but on behalf of the Parsons Memorial Lodge Summer Series, and considering all who call Tuolumne Meadows home, ephemerally or interminably, including deer, chipmunk, dragonfly, marmot, ranger, bear, bluebird, moss, pewee, killdeer, chickadee, antlion, frog, toad, bumblebee, lichen, fox, lodgepole, and all kin who have come through here for all of time. And of course, all of you. Welcome. You're all so welcome here. I'm Ranger Karen Amstutz, and I want to thank you for attending this 31st annual Parsons Memorial Lodge Summer Series. 31 years. To get started today, let's all just, in your masks, take a deep breath, breathe in, and breathe out a very settling breath. If you're feeling it, close your eyes and just feel the chair that you're sitting on supporting your body. Think of all it took to get you to this place today. Breathe any tension out. Breathe in the peace within these walls. You are here. Let your breath and your heartbeat slow. You are here. Feel the energy of the sparkling soda springs water coming from deep in the earth's crust, gathering minerals as it passes through each layer, rising up, up, up to surface here, right outside. Be held here. This water is not finished. This ancient water has a timelessness, flowing with old stories and creating new ones as water does. You and I are part of this story, part of this place. You can open your eyes to this space. Look around you, look around this room. Find some eyes that you've maybe never looked into before and greet them over your mask. Say hi with your eyes. And find at least one more person and greet them with your eyes. Say hi. There's so much happening outside, but inside today we are here and we're beyond fortunate to be here at Parsons Memorial Lodge. Built in 1915. This historic building was created by Mark White of Maybeck and White, the architects, to celebrate the Sierra Club's commitment to conservation in the name of Edward Taylor Parsons. Built to house discussions regarding concern for and protection of the natural world and to shelter visitors like us in storms and cold days and heat. It's always the perfect temperature in here. Each rock, each beam is from this place. The Parsons Summer Series was started in 1992 by Margaret Eisler. You can clap. She's right there.
Oh, Margaret.
I know, and I'm so thankful to be carrying on this tradition for my part. Margaret wanted to continue the tradition of hosting important conversations about what's going on in our world and to build on and diversify the themes. So we hope it continues on long, long into the future. And now in 2022, this summer series can help us renew our connection to this place and our love for this unique and precious planet that we call home. Can help us build community around care for this place. And here we strengthen community around what we have and hold dear and learn more deeply through talks like this how to protect what we love and what's vital. Today's program perfectly exemplifies these goals. We're so fortunate to have Dr. Hannah Gosnell from Oregon State University. She's a professor of geography at Oregon State. She studies landscapes, change, water resources, climate change, and environmental governance in the context of rural working landscapes. I didn't memorize all this. In the U.S. West. Her research focuses on the human dimension of rangeland management from a socio-ecological systems perspective. She's particularly interested in the social, cultural, and psychological aspects of the transition to regenerative agriculture and the implications for landowners' capacity to adapt to social, economic, and environmental change. Hannah earned her master's and PhD in geography from the University of Colorado and her bachelor's degree from Brown University. So I'm so excited to have her here, but as she says, she learned everything she knows and is important to her in her career right here in Yosemite, working for the Yosemite Institute years ago. I know. And before I get started and hand the sacred carpet space over to Hannah, I want to thank you all for being here, and to thank you all, thanks to Yosemite Conservancy donors for making programs like this possible, the whole summer series. For the volunteers like Terry Lynn, who helps with the setup and with being there at the door to screen out all the the rats that might come in. And thanks to all of the other volunteers that we have, and to my staff, the National Park Service Rangers, who we could not do this job without. Friends of Parsons Lodge, if you're interested in being a friend of Parsons Lodge, I will take your name right here. If you want to be on the mailing list for future programs, you can sign up right here. So I want to thank you all. And tomorrow we have a program, it's not advertised, but mountain music program, 2 o'clock tomorrow at the same time, same place. And next weekend we have Joe Craven, incredible musician, on Sunday, and Saturday we have a program, it's like a mini retreat by Heather Sullivan. And then the next weekend, August 20th and 21st, we'll finish off this year's summer series with the Poetry Festival. Tuolumne Meadows Poetry Festival. So, without further ado, I want to introduce Hannah Gosnell. So, give her a warm person's welcome.
All right, well, thank you, Karen. Thanks so much. What an honor to be here. It's always so fun to come back to Yosemite, and I've been coming back here as often as possible, but this feels like a really special visit. It feels like in some ways I'm coming full circle, because it really was like 30 years ago. I was working here and living here in 1990s, like 30 years ago, so I first hatched the idea to pursue a career in geography. And I was living and working in Yosemite National Park, lived here from 89 to 93, and working for Yosemite Institute, working for Outward Bound in the Southern Sierra in the summers, and just with that exposure to public land politics and the intricacies and complexities of natural resource management, I just gained a real appreciation for wanting to understand human-environment relations and wildlife management and water resource management. I was reading Cadillac Desert, and I just wanted to understand more about how humans relate to the environment and why, and what are some of the environmental policies that might be effective to promote more sustainability. So I decided to go to graduate school in geography, left here, went straight to Boulder, got a master's in geography, ended up staying on for a PhD, and somehow ended up pursuing a career in academia, ended up being a professor at Oregon State. And so for the last 20 years, I've really been doing research on various aspects of human dimensions of natural resource management. And I grew up on the East Coast, so most of my research has to do with agricultural landscapes, working landscapes in the West, and occasionally in Australia. But I grew up on the East Coast, never thought I'd end up studying ranching as a career. But what happened is when I came out west and fell in love with this place and started wanting to learn more about Western landscapes, I learned that 90% of the West is grazed by cattle. And if you care about Western landscapes and you care about biodiversity, you kind of need to understand ranchers and what they do and why and how they think and how they can be persuaded to manage lands, all the important lands they manage, mostly riparian bottomlands, the areas that are really important for habitat. You know, what is it that makes them tick? So a lot of my projects over the last 20 years have involved interviewing ranchers and doing qualitative research, just trying to understand what they do. So we've been focused on regenerative agriculture and ranchers involved in regenerative agriculture for the past 10 years or so. And I just also want to just give a quick caveat, because I know I'm in the land of livestock as hooved maggots. Hooved locusts. Right. So yeah, I just want to say that when I left here, when I left Yosemite in 1993 in my pickup truck, on my back of my pickup truck, I did have a bumper sticker that said cattle free in '93. So I was like, I was sure I was sort of like a cocky young, environmentalist, and I was pretty sure that we needed to get rid of ranching on public lands, and that was the answer to all our problems. But when I went to graduate school, a lot of things changed. I learned a lot, and I just sort of maybe took a little bit more of a pragmatic stance and realized, okay, ranching's probably not going anywhere anytime soon. So what can we do to make it better? So regenerative agriculture and the ranchers that I've met who are engaged in regenerative agriculture really offer a lot of hope and inspiration to me. So I've sort of gone from being a black and white thinker to being much more of a gray thinker. But that's what happens when you get older, right? You get middle aged and all that. Nothing's clear. Anyway, so I'm just wondering, how many of you have heard of this term regenerative agriculture? Okay, maybe about half of you. Yeah, so it's been getting a lot of attention in recent years, especially even in recent months. And maybe some of you have seen the Netflix documentary Kiss the Ground, featuring Woody Harrelson, or the book Regeneration by Paul Hawken. This big book just came out recently. It's gotten a lot of attention. And then even just right now in the Senate, they're debating a bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, which has a bunch of stuff in there focused on climate-smart agriculture. They're planning to allocate $20 billion to support ranchers and farmers transitioning to climate-smart regenerative agriculture. So there's a lot of interest in this approach to producing food and fiber, because the focus is on regenerating soil. When you do regenerative ag, it's all about regenerating soil. And when you regenerate soil, you increase soil organic matter, you increase soil carbon sequestration, pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in the soil. That contributes to climate change mitigation, in theory. There's still lots of debates about that. But then also it contributes to climate change adaptation, because with the more soil organic matter, the soil is able to hold more water. And so when there's drought, ranchers and farmers that practice this approach are more resilient to the drought. They're able to hold more water on their land. So there's a lot of excitement about it. This idea that this could be a solution to our climate crisis. So anyway, so what I'm going to talk about today. So regenerative ag also promotes biodiversity, and people who practice this produce really good food and fiber. A lot of them are doing grass-finished beef and so on. But what I want to argue is that it's not only sort of these ecological outcomes that are improved, but there's also a sort of psychological, cultural, social aspect to regenerative ag that may even be spiritual in some ways. So we're going to talk about that here. That's explains the title, Regenerating Soil, Regenerating Soul. And then the second half of the title speaks to my interest in the role that wonder, awe, and biophilia may be playing in ranchers' decisions to adopt regenerative agriculture in the first place and to persist on that path in the long run. So make sure I'm covering. Yeah. So I am going to make signals to you when we want to change. So the other way this feels like full circle is because my interest in wonder and awe and biophilia really had its start being an environmental educator here in Yosemite, living here in the early 90s with Karen. And here's me at my trailer at Crane Flat where I lived with my YI uniform. Karen's at Lower Yosemite Falls with a group, no doubt inspiring awe and wonder in this group. Either that or they're wondering when they get to go to spider caves, one of those. But yeah, but the theory of change behind environmental education, Yosemite Institute, Nature Bridge, the Park Service intern program, is that we think that if we can help people understand nature a little bit, maybe even inspire a few aha moments, people might start to care about nature. Maybe they might even start to love nature. Maybe they might become an earth steward, or at least develop some kind of conservation ethic. So that's the idea. That's the theory of change. I think there's probably in academia a lot of debates about whether that's true or not. But But that's kind of what keeps us going around here, is that if we can just help people understand nature, maybe then they'll become more empathetic and compassionate and caring more about it. So, as an academic, I'm really interested in the extent to which these ideas apply to ranchers and farmers who really are in charge of managing about half the planet. Agriculture takes up about half of our terrestrial Earth surface, and ranching in particular, livestock, is on about a quarter of the planet. So there's high stakes with how these people think and how they manage their lands, and so I'm curious to know to what extent can we inspire more biophilia, more sustainable behavior. So this is what this program is. It's about. I keep thinking I'm going to turn it here, but I'm going like this. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is talk about a few core concepts, a couple big ideas I'd like to get across, a few definitions. I'll define regenerative agriculture for you briefly, and then I will talk a little about the research I did in Australia and the US West, talk about why I think it might be significant, especially now as we're talking about different policies and programs to support climate smart ag, and then leave you with a few points to ponder. So 3 big ideas. Click for the first one. And this is not going to be news to any of you, but the idea that humans have an innate connection to nature, which has the potential to inspire them to practice reciprocity and act in ways that benefit or support nature. Second, nature is constantly providing us with feedback. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, direct, indirect, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. And in theory, this feedback influences our behavior. Farmers engaged in growing plants and producing food experience these feedbacks in more immediate ways. And then putting those together, the farmers that practice regenerative ag are more connected to nature and are generally more attuned to these feedbacks. And what I argue is that this fuels their motivation to persist on a regenerative path, which allows them to play an important role in planetary recovery rather than being the culprit. Because so often when we talk about farming and ranching, we say, oh, that's the reason we have a climate crisis. And it's true. A lot of our problems in our climate, I think about a quarter of the greenhouse gas emissions globally come from agriculture. And so, and it's probably closer to a third if you count all the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the larger food system. So, it's important to think about how they can also be part of the solution. So go ahead, next one. Okay, so the first big idea is about just thinking about what is this human-nature connection. I'm a big fan of the concept of biophilia. I just think it's really interesting. Sure, many of you are familiar with this term. I know you're a big E.O. Wilson fan. But technically it means love of life, biophilia. And the term was made popular by E.O. Wilson, who was a Harvard professor, a biologist, just died last year at the age of 92. And he put forth a hypothesis, in fact, I'll pass this around. He put forth the hypothesis that humans have an innate tendency to focus on life and lifelike processes. It's also been stated differently. Humans have an innate tendency to affiliate with nature and other life forms. And this tendency is rooted in our evolutionary history, evolving, co-evolving with other creatures. These other creatures we needed for survival, but that we also had sort of a fundamental appreciation for them. And so we see that showing up in spiritual iconography and different languages, the metaphors we use on sort of a global scale. So the book is really interesting because the biophilia hypothesis is controversial and it's debated, but there's a lot of compelling arguments in the book, which I find rather interesting. Anybody who has a pet or who has a garden, likes to plant flowers, who likes to go birding, although nobody showed up for Karen's birding this morning, unfortunately. But you know what I'm talking about, right? You know what that feels like when you just want to connect with nature. You come to Yosemite, right? That's why people come here. So we know what that's all about. Now, obviously, in the last 100 years or so, with the rise of modern civilization and technology, that tendency has weakened. And some people hypothesize that that's part of the reason for our environmental crisis, is because of that weakened link between humans and nature. And conversely, that the way to address our planetary crisis is to strengthen that biophilic tendency, to somehow resurrect it. And so another, click for a second, another key concept in the hypothesis is that connecting with other species is actually integral to our development as individuals and as a species. Again, I find that really fascinating because it just makes you think, well, wow, if I'm not connecting with nature, if I'm just like living in New York City and I'm on a computer all day and I'm like really not connecting with nature, maybe I'm kind of stunted as a human. You know, that to be fully human, you really do need to cultivate these biophilic tendencies. And it's kind of just an interesting idea. So anyway, I'm still like sort of a novice when it comes to understanding all the nuances around the biophilia concept. But I just find it really fun and interesting and intriguing. So, and relevant to what I'm talking about today. So, okay, we'll go to the next slide. So two other concepts related to the human-nature connection that I want to talk about today are awe and wonder. And I'm guessing that you all know a thing or two about awe and wonder, given that you're sitting in Tawny Meadows. And so to get here, it would have been hard to avoid a feeling of awe or wonder just to get here today, I think. So I'm going to ask you all to help me define these two terms. So we're just going to take a couple minutes, ask you to just chat with your neighbor for a second and see if you can come up with a brief definition of awe, of wonder. How are they different? How do each of them make you feel? And maybe think of an example of one of them. So let's just see if we can collectively define these two terms on our own. So I'll just give you about 2 minutes. Just chat with your neighbor.
Awe and wonder, they define awesome and wonderful.
I'm Sarah.
How awe and wonder are different? You have a question, maybe? I wonder. That's what we often say. But awe and wonder makes you cry or uneasy. But I feel connected to it. You know, we're not yes, it makes you cry. It makes you overwhelmed. Like really heartbreaking beauty. It does. And again, one. Makes you go to focus again tomorrow. And the next day, and the next day. And some people don't have that excitement or interest. They get a picture and there's a dream. It's not inspiring or wonderful for them. Gathering, it's like check.
Okay, just maybe another 20 seconds and we'll come back.
Which is a concept I don't understand. So it's there, so you get. So how do we touch those people? Slow down a little bit. Put the foot down.
Okay, so who can help me out here? Who wants to take a stab at defining awe and or wonder? And telling me a little bit about it. Sharing some thoughts.
We came up with awe as being defined as a humble amazement.
Humble, I like that. Yeah, good. Okay, and then what about wonder? How is wonder similar or different? Were you raising your hand?
That's you, Bill.
Wonder is focusing on the question mark
Aha.
and thinking, I've discovered this, now what? What does it mean?
Yeah. Curiosity. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Any other comments about awe and wonder? That sort of helps us see how they're different. What are some examples of a sense of awe or sense of wonder that you've had around here? What's yours?
A lot of people think of awe as something big, like a pine tree or something like that. You get a sense of awe from something small and cute. So it's spelled A-W-W-W-W-W.
Yeah. Yes, right. Well, yes, and because part of the reason I'm bringing up this concept of awe is because what I end up talking about here, you'll see a little bit of spoiler.
And it's not funny, all of it. It's really serious because babies being cute, that's a survival trait for the species. The mother's going to take care of the baby if it's cute.
Right. Yeah, and I'm going to be talking about farmers having a sense of awe about the microbiome. So like really small. Yeah. So okay, what are some other examples? What about a sense of wonder? So you have felt a sense of awe for tiny creatures, and what about a sense of wonder? Can you give an example?
we were talking about more just being like the questioning mind of like the how or the why, and you know, when you said about 90% of the country being, or of the West being grazing land, I just, every time I see a cow out there on that dry land, like I'm from the eastern US too, and I see them, I'm like, I don't understand, like how they're surviving,
What are
where
they
they're getting
eating?
enough food or moisture or whatever, and yeah, just like and the resiliency of nature, sometimes it just, I don't even understand how it's coping with so much, so yeah, that sense of how and why and.
Yeah, good. All right, well, that's a good start. So let's go to the next slide here. So I just compiled a bunch of little tidbits about these two concepts, looked at some dictionaries, looked at some academic literature, looked at Brene Brown. Everyone, we always got to consult Brene Brown, Atlas of the Heart, Mapping Meaningful Connection in the Language of Human Experiences. Anybody read that? My book club just read that, I love it. Anyway, she has lots of images in there, and so here's her image of how awe looks, how it feels, what it does to us. But these are just a mishmash of definitions, and what I really liked, I like that you came up with humble, because it turns out awe is a self-transcendent emotion, inspired by the sacred or sublime, feeling of respect and amazement. What it does, it diminishes emphasis on self-interest, it shifts the attention towards the needs and concerns of others, including other species, and it promotes humility. Awe-inducing experiences, says Brene Brown, may be one of the fastest and most powerful methods of personal change and growth. So that is pretty cool. It's also a foundational aspect of our moral orientation towards the natural world. I think definitely related to biophilia. So go ahead to the next one. And then wonder. Wonder is more about curiosity. It inspires the wish to understand. Like you said, the question mark fuels our passion for exploration and learning, for curiosity and adventure. It's what makes you, when you see that butterfly, you want to go to your book and find out what kind of butterfly was that. Or you go to Ranger Karen and say, tell me about the butterfly. You know, you want to know more about it. Rachel Carson made a good point. You know, she's a naturalist and writer who famously wrote Silent Spring in 1962 about the dangers of the agrochemical industry. And she also wrote a book about the sense of wonder. She says the more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe about us, the less taste we will have for destruction. So that's kind of an important concept to think about. So all three of these, biophilia, awe, and wonder, are relevant to some of my findings when I was talking to ranchers and farmers about how and why they were excited about regenerative agriculture. So let's keep going. Okay, so the second big idea has to do with the feedback that we're constantly getting from nature. This is just a simple diagram of a social ecological system. I teach a class called Resilience-Based Natural Resource Management at Oregon State. I teach a class called Social Ecological Systems. Just an interesting way to look at the world, just like a lens to look at human-environment relations. And so this diagram here just is about showing you that, you know, you've got human systems on the left there, individuals, groups, institutions, that's us. And we are, especially like we think about resource managers in this case, are constantly engaged in actions and interventions. It could be logging, fishing, mining, agriculture, planting seeds, taking tourists around somewhere. So we've got these active interventions that we're doing that have an impact on ecosystem structure and function. And then that the condition of ecosystem structure and function determines what kind of ecosystem services we get to enjoy as humans. So we get to enjoy provisioning services like food and fiber and fuel, regulating services like climate regulation, water regulation, cultural services like recreation, opportunities for spiritual experiences in nature. So those ecosystem services are sometimes called nature's benefits, are really key. And they are what, as humans in our human system, we really can't live without these. But the problem is there's often sort of a weak link between the top of the diagram here and the bottom. You know, we engage in these actions. We don't always really put two and two together about how what we're doing is having an implication for whether or not we're able to go backpacking in August because now there's smoke and fire, you know, or not, or maybe our food doesn't taste very good. So the weak link thing is kind of a problem. And so we'll go to the next slide. So in resilience thinking, this is a book I use in one of my classes, one of the key concepts is the value of tight feedbacks. And if you can have tight feedbacks, then people are more aware of how their impacts are playing out in the land, and then they can sort of adapt and change and modify, and they're sort of just more tuned in. So here's just as an example, you have a lot of people writing about, in resilience literature, writing about the importance of these tight feedbacks. This is just one example from the Food Policy Journal. And I thought it'd be kind of interesting just to see how they're writing about this. But title on the importance of tightening feedback loops for sustainable development of food systems. I'll just read the first couple sentences of the abstract. In the process of searching for sustainable trajectories in the food system, this paper reviews and discusses the importance of tightening feedback loops between ecosystems, actors in the food production chain, and consumers. Intensification, specialization, distancing, concentration, and homogenization are trends identified as major constraints for tightened feedback loops. These trends can mask or make it possible to disregard feedback signals from unhealthy ecosystems and weaken communication in the food chain. And the regenerative ag folks that I was talking to, I was going to say, yeah, so in modern industrial agriculture, this is really true. There's really, I think, pretty weak links between weak feedbacks. For example, conventional farmers will often take a soil sample and just send it off to a lab, and the lab will tell them, oh, you need to put this many pounds of this on there, and this much fertilizer, and the farmer is kind of disconnected and isn't really taking responsibility. They're just sort of, okay, all right, I need to buy how much chemicals? Okay, that's pretty typical. And so when they switch to regenerative, they have to learn all about monitoring. They start monitoring their own soil. They have to understand what it means, what they're seeing in the soil, and what it means for how to increase the fertility of the soil without chemicals. What kind of compost should I use? What should I be putting in my compost tea? So it really gets them thinking more. They're much more dialed in, and they're always constantly monitoring. So we'll go to the next slide. This is a finding from another article I wrote a couple years ago about regenerative ag, some of my findings. And really, it's just about, the point is that feedbacks associated with daily monitoring occur in both cognitive and emotional spheres. And I argue that that's what drives their adaptive, proactive management. So those of you who are resource managers, I'm sure you're very familiar with adaptive management, the adaptive management cycle, where you plan something, you implement it, you monitor the results, you evaluate what happened, you learn from that, and then you adjust your planning, and you keep going round and round. So adaptive management, you're constantly like learning, evaluating, monitoring. The point that I wanted to make in this article is that this monitoring that the farmers and ranchers are doing, and, it's multi-sensory. You're smelling, tasting, walking in the soil, testing it. They have these sensations that lead to emotions and feelings and virtues and drives. And that second loop there is really important because that's kind of what keeps them motivated, I mean, when you get negative feedback, it's a bummer. But a lot of times what they're seeing is they're seeing their degraded land getting better. And so that motivates them to continue. So I talk about these as like self-amplifying positive feedbacks that get them going in this really good direction. And if they didn't have that positive emotional hit from this, they might not stick with it because it's hard. It's definitely a lot harder than sending your soil sample to the guy and having him tell you how much fertilizer to put on. It's hard work, but it turns out it's pretty rewarding. So let's go to the next one. And then the third big idea is just that farmers play an important role in planetary health, and really, like I said already, it can be good or bad. This is just a little promo from the film Kiss the Ground, which, since I'm not going to go into great depth here, I really recommend that you watch it. It's on Netflix. And it just came out a couple of years ago. It does a really nice job of describing the emergence of modern industrial agriculture, how we got to where we are today. It's a pretty troublesome situation. And then what's happening in certain fringe areas where people are going back to the old way, right? They're kind of going back to the way their great-grandparents did it. But it's hard to go back. So on the left, you have sort of a modern industrial farm. There's a lot of bare ground. There's a lot of fossil fuels being emitted. There's a lot of machinery, a lot of carbon coming out of the atmosphere, coming out of the soil because of all the bare ground and soil erosion. On the right, you have deep-rooted native perennials. You have cattle being managed holistically with sort of a mixed system of animal and plants. You have better water holding capacity. There's no bare ground. And so just given that farmers and ranchers, like I said, control a huge part of the planet, the stakes are pretty high. They can play a really great role or they can play a really problematic role. And like I said, I'm just sort of oversimplifying this now in the interest of time so that we can keep moving. But I do hope that you'll watch that film. I think, or also Paul Hawkins' book Regeneration is really good too. So all right, let's just keep going. I'll talk a little bit about regenerative agriculture. There's a lot of definitions flying around out there. This is just one from an article I published recently. It's kind of just sort of a big umbrella definition. It's a set of principles and practices to restore and maintain soil health and fertility, biodiversity, watershed health, and soil water retention, all while improving ecological and economic resilience. So it's not just about ecological, it's also about, this pencils out, and actually ends up penciling out for people. All right, we'll go to the next one. So some of the key principles, before we get into the practices, are a focus on soil health and ecosystem processes. They all go to classes and trainings, they learn about the water cycle, the mineral cycle, the energy cycle, community dynamics. They learn about systems thinking and start learning how to try to think about their operation in terms of systems. A lot of them adopt holistic management, which is a holistic approach to looking at every decision you make. Holistic decision making looks at all the social, ecological, and economic implications of every decision you make. And there was one other thing. They're all about leveraging natural processes. So first you have to understand the natural processes. How does this ecosystem even work? And then you figure out ways to work with nature to accomplish your goals, instead of I need to kill these animals because they're in the way. No, how can I work with these animals to produce the food and fiber? So it's kind of exciting when they figure that out. And then so some of the key practices are daily monitoring, holistic planned grazing if you're on a ranch, and that's all about moving the cattle regularly to avoid overgrazing, and regenerate the soil and bring back native perennials. Low stress stockmanship ends up being important, because if you're going to move the cattle regularly, some ranchers move them more than once a day, whereas like a conventional rancher might leave their cows out for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month at a time. So they're constantly moving them. It means they need to really be able to move them easily. So they have to learn about how do cows think, and what do I need to do to get this cow to move where I want her to go. And so they develop a closer relationship with their animals as a result, and kind of work as a team with their animals. They see their animals as tools to regenerate the soil, and then the beef or the food is sort of a byproduct. It's not the focus, it's not the goal. The goal is a healthy system that then produces the product. The ones that are really hardcore forego chemicals completely. Instead, they use compost instead of synthetic fertilizer. They figure out ways to deal with pests instead of using pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides. Cover crops are really important, whether it's farming or ranching. Bare ground is anathema. You never want bare ground. That's why they'll tolerate weeds, because they'd rather have weeds than bare ground, and they sort of have a bigger understanding of how succession takes place. So the weeds, they know it's kind of a temporary thing, and as their soil gets healthier, that they'll eventually be able to strive for the plants that they want. And so they're trying to facilitate perennialization, to get rid of the annual non-native plants like alfalfa and bring back the native deep-rooted perennials. Keep going. So I was originally funded by the Forest Service a while back to try to understand how ranchers in the U.S. West could be incentivized to adopt climate-smart practices. And we eventually expanded the study to include sheep and beef farmers in Australia. And I say farmers in Australia and ranchers in the West. People that want in Australia, they don't use the term rancher, but they kind of are the same thing. So I go back and forth between farmers and ranchers. But my research is really all on people who raise livestock, mostly cattle, sometimes sheep. But I haven't done my own individual personal research on row crop farming. So this is all about the sheep and beef farmers and the ranchers in the West. And because the reason we decided to look in Australia also is regenerative ag is really big there. They're kind of on the leading edge. There are a lot of really high-profile experts there that I wanted to interview. And they were also thinking about developing a carbon market at the time that I was planning this. So because our original hypothesis going into this was that really it would be all about money. You know, if you could just give a rancher enough money, they would transition. They would start doing climate-smart agriculture. You know, if we could just create a carbon market, then the ranchers will want to sign up for carbon credits, and we'll generate carbon credits, and we'll start mitigating climate change and offsets. So that was our initial hypothesis. So we started out by wanting to interview people who were already involved in a carbon market or were thinking about being involved in the carbon market. So go to the next one. So our methods are, go back one. So our methods were, I interviewed 23 ranchers in the U.S. West who were involved in the Chicago Climate Exchange, which was a somewhat short-lived voluntary carbon market here where ranchers could generate carbon credits. And some of them made quite a bit of money doing that with their holistic management and their regenerative practices. 21 sheep and beef farmers in New South Wales, Australia. I also interviewed a bunch of key informants, educators and consultants who work with the ranchers and farmers to help them with the transition process, because it's not easy. Well, pretty much they all need some kind of training or instructors or a class or a course or an individual one-on-one consultant, and those consultants have really good insights because they see over and over. They can watch that transformation journey, and they know where the bumps are and where the challenges are and where the opportunities and pathways are. So I transcribed and coded the hundreds of pages of interviews and came up with exemplar quotes, which I'll share some of those with you here. The quotes will all have attributions. So if there's an F, it means farmer. If there's a C, it means consultant. If there's an E, it means an educator. And so educator is more like a professor or someone who teaches holistic management classes to a big group. The consultants are usually more like these one-on-one working with someone. So, and then I also did participant observation, which is another. So I'm a qualitative researcher. These are typical qualitative research methods. Participant observation meaning I went to a lot of meetings. I attended an 8-week holistic management course, and you kind of go and you participate. You're taking notes. You're kind of a fly on the wall. And those notes also become data that you use to try to put together your big picture and identify patterns, and of course document analysis too. Okay, and then before we go to the next one, let me just say, so in a nutshell, what we found was that it really wasn't about the money at all. There were a whole bunch of other reasons that these people were transitioning. They were transitioning because it made sense. A lot of them were experiencing negative feedbacks and having sort of crises in their former role as conventional producers, and they realized that this new way of doing things made them more resilient. It made them more prosperous economically, and it just was more enjoyable. So the money turns out almost like when I went to Australia and said, "Hey, how do you feel about this carbon farming initiative? That you're going to make a lot of money if you sign up for carbon credits." And they're like, "I don't care about that. I'm doing it because it makes sense for X, Y, and Z." And then a lot of them would talk. So they talk about their X, Y, and Z, why it made sense from a practical point of view. But then they'd also, what this talk focuses on is the parts when they talk about how it also just made them feel better. They just really enjoyed it. It was fun. Some of the people I talked to were real veterans. Most of them had been doing it for 10, 20, sometimes 30 years. So they had good stories to tell about their transformation journey and their trajectory. All right, so let's go to the next one. So I'm going to share with you some of these stories of transformation. They almost all started with some story of crisis. Often it was about something related to climate change, drought, floods, fire. You guys have heard. Australia is getting it even harder than we are. It's been really bad there for the last 5-10 years. But even going back further, the droughts there have just been incredible. And so debt is another big one, bankruptcy, and then also negative experiences with agrochemicals. So here's a typical, here's a quote from a rancher, a farmer from Australia. This would be a typical one that I'd hear. And you have to imagine this with an Australian accent.
I was just going to ask.
I can't do an Australian accent. My kids are really good at it. But I spent 8 months there when they were little, and they picked it up like that. So it was experiences like that. The drought of 87, the drought of 82, 83, just made me feel powerless. And then we got the big fire in 1990, and then we had 8 years of drought, and we just didn't get any winter. And the normal winter rainfall pattern deserted us. And we just survived on summer storms, and the country was just forever blowing. And I thought, there's got to be a different way. And so this is typical. You'd hear this, and they'd want to figure out, what can I do now? So go to the next one. Another typical story would be about negative experiences with agrochemicals. And typically what you'd hear is they'd talk about the synthetic fertilizer that they were using and saying, at first it was great. Got the synthetic fertilizer, my grass, I was producing way more, I was making more money, I was able to feed more cows, it was wonderful. But then over time, it stopped working as well. And I had to start applying more and more. And I could see that my soil was turning dirt. And in the long run, this was not going to be a sustainable approach. It was costing so much money. Some of these people going bankrupt trying to spend all this money on their synthetic fertilizers and their pesticides and their herbicides. And chemical salesmen are a key part of the community in some of these rural areas in both Australia and the West. They're a big part of the community. They show up every year. They're selling their chemicals, and it's just part of the culture almost. But some people even had bad experiences with being poisoned, or their kids are poisoned, and they realized that some of them would come to realize, I can't keep going like this. So one consultant had this really moving story. Every time I tell this quote, I joke up. I'm going to try not to this time, but this is a consultant who was talking about what her observations about a typical conventional farmer comes to her, and and they're kind of stuck in this rut where they're just really alienated from nature and they're disconnected. She says, you know, when you're sitting in a tractor, all you have to do is fill up the big drums on your tractor. Now you're just driving back and forth, and they're not coming into contact with that toxic stuff that they're spraying out. I might have to have Karen read it. It's a wonder how it is they can drive down the field and look in their rear view mirror and watch all the
We can read it, you don't.
okay. I've read this quote like 50 times, and I just always does. But I think I feel not only for the bird, I just feel for the farmer, like being so disconnected. You know, to look in their rearview mirror and watch all the birds and insects dying behind them. It's heartrending, really, to have people saying, I was driving along, you know, there was a flock of something or other, it came and landed, and all the dead bodies are out there now. So there's some sort of disconnection with the mechanization of that application, and even though they're visualizing it happening and they can talk about it, it's somehow not emotionally affecting them. This is the consultant telling me this story, and she says, because they're not actually involved with feeling the soil, touching the soil. This speaks to the biophilia thing about technology making us separate from nature, and then the consultant saying that, well, it's because they're not touching the soil, and if they were touching the soil, then they wouldn't be disconnected. That's kind of an interesting point there. So we'll keep going. A lot of the stories were about like getting off, but the problem, so a lot of them you can imagine want to get off the chemicals, but it's hard. Another consultant talked about how it's almost like they're on drugs. It's like an addiction, and they kind of don't want to give up the chemicals. They're nervous. They don't think they're going to be able to produce their food without it, you know. And it's like a weaning process that they have to get off of it, and they need the consultant to kind of hold their hands along the way. So the consultant ends up being a really important person that kind of teaches them the facts that they need to know, but also is a support person. And this consultant here, well, when you see FE, that means farmer. He's an educator who's also a farmer himself. But he's someone who teaches people in classes, and he says, yeah, well, it's hard to change people's minds. You know, a lot of these guys are middle-aged men. I mean, there's some women. I've interviewed a few women, but mostly it was middle-aged white men we're talking about here. It's hard to change. You know, you've been doing this all your life. Your dad did it this way. So this person says, yeah, you know, I think the process of change is about you have to deinstall some software, and then you have to reinstall the new program, okay? And then you've got to debug it and how it interrelates. And part of the new software is starting to understand ecosystems and start to see land ecosystem function and see land in a new light. And it's sort of like, oh, I didn't know that, or I didn't see that, and I didn't know why. And so the consultant plays an important role in that sense. Let's see what I say about that. So yeah, I was just going to say that the consultant sort of has to inspire a little bit of a sense of wonder or curiosity in the farmer or rancher to kind of keep them going on this journey. So they'll teach them things, they'll show them things in the microscope, for example, to kind of get them interested. So keep going. This is one about how learning about the microbiome leads to this feeling of awe, these very small creatures. This consultant talks about the links between awe and then being open-minded enough to learn some new things. They say one of the biggest aha moments is when they start to see the soil structure change on their property. For example, they'll see that before they could not stick their finger into the soil deeper than ½ an inch, and now they can go in all the way to their palm. They start seeing the mycelium forming, the soil aggregation happening, the moisture in the soil from the water seeping in and not running off, and they're like, wow, it's possible, it's amazing. And they look at the improved soil with disbelief, and then they get happy, they get excited. And I think what's interesting here is the link between they're happy, not just because they're thinking, oh, I'm going to be able to grow food without chemicals, but also just because it's cool. You know, they're just sort of enjoying, like, this is really neat what they're learning about. All right, next one. And then a really good tool for instilling wonder is to bring out the microscope. And this educator is talking about what it's like when he'll have a whole class of people, and he'll give them all microscopes or little hand lenses, and they go out and he's talking about what it's like for the students, and he says, yeah, it's like, oh, holy smoke, in that little pile of stuff, there really are a lot of living things. They can see it, and they just can't believe what they look like up close, and they've never thought about it before in that way, and they're seeing mites and really ancient ancestral forms of centipedes and spiders, and they're all in there by the gazillions. They're crawling all over each other, something on top of something that's rotting away, and it's endlessly wondrous and fascinating. And that's the cool thing. It's not just like observing some other culture. It's like we're looking at ourselves when we look at the soil. And this professor is really interesting and kind of out there. He's kind of a wacky professor, and he talked about how the students start to realize that, like, oh, I'm made up of the same stuff as the soil. Or, you know, the soil's living and I'm living, and we're kind of the same thing. And, you know, we're this matter that makes up my body spends most of its time underground, but then it makes itself into a human and comes up for like 80 years, and then it goes back down, and it gets recycled. And, you know, it makes it still sort of like a humility in the students. And it makes the students want to learn more and kind of have a better understanding of their place in nature, in the larger universe. So, all right, next one. And then another thing is the connection to other forms of life and understanding how they benefit from having these little creatures on their land that they formerly were killing with pesticides and herbicides and insecticides and fungicides. This consultant says there's nothing more rewarding for farmers than knowing that they're doing a good job when they understand that ecosystem framework. They'll get most excited about fungi. They see strands of fungi, you know, and that's brilliant because they know that's a really good thing. They'll see spiders spinning webs between tall plants. That's why I was admiring your spider webs on your cabin. And they know that's a really good thing. You know, the spiders are a top order predator. If they get lots of spiders, they know that there's lots of things happening that feed the spiders through that soil food web. They get very excited about digging around and finding worms for the first time and not seeing runoff from their land after a heavy storm, or the runoff that happens is clear and doesn't have soil in it. They see huge benefits from seeing different types of birds coming in. And what I noticed about this quote is like they just sort of casually throw together the links between having these animals on your land and having better water quality and better water cycle, or the fact that there's less runoff, so there's more soil water holding capacity, and the runoff that does happen is clear. And so they're linking that with, they're like, wow, that's because of these little animals that are helping me and making my soil better. And all the benefits of the birds coming in. The birds are eating the insects that they used to have to spray for. So, next one. So this is one of my favorite quotes and pictures. This is my colleague Nick Gill from University of Wollongong, who was one of my co-authors on the left, and a farmer we were visiting with on the right. And this farmer goes out monitoring every day, and he's just talking about how much he enjoys monitoring. It's like this multi-sensory experience. He says, I love walking out here, feeling the soft soil under my feet. I could walk out here all day. It makes me happy. Our old place in the Riverina, all the bare soil, it made me depressed. I can feel the ground has gotten softer over time, just driving over it. And oh, I love smelling soil. Yeah, it smells earthy, you know, it's nice. I mean, Dad used to make all this compost at home. It was beautiful. You get that smell, it's magnificent. And here I think too, what's interesting is it's not just the joy he's talking about, but also being depressed when you're on a piece of land that's all burnt out and, you know, hard soil and no grass on it. And it just makes me think about the links between our environmental crisis and our mental health crisis. And you know, that there's something else there that comes up. So, all right, we'll go to the next one. And then kind of wrapping up here, these two quotes really, I think, sum things up. That whole philosophy of trying to kill things that want to grow and trying to grow things that want to die, it's incredibly soul destroying and costly, says one farmer. Another one says, I've actually been a very reserved person all my life. I've actually been very shy, but this whole world has absolutely electrified my being. And this speaks to some of that, what we were talking about earlier with the Biophilia, E.O. Wilson, that connection with other life forms is integral to our human development. And so when you're disconnected, it's somehow soul destroying. And also the thoughts about awe, that awe can lead to personal growth. And here, you know, by being excited about nature, being electrified by things they're seeing under the microscope or on their land, or the improvements they're seeing, you know, it makes them into kind of gives them a whole new identity and a sense of being more a member of the larger ecological community. So I'll go to the next one. So before I wrap up, I just want to say, you know, this all sounds really great, so why aren't more people doing this? It's still pretty much of a fringe thing. It's hard. There's a lot of barriers. Learning about those ecosystem processes is hard. It's a lot of, you know, homework and reading and classes. Learning about the ecosystem processes and how nature works, but then learning how to manage them. Okay, great. I know about the water cycle and mineral cycle and energy cycle now and community dynamics, but what can I do to actually leverage those processes and help them make me grow some food and fiber? So that part, just those practical aspects, are quite challenging. But a lot of it too is just psychological. The sort of I'm set in my ways. You know, I've been doing it this way, and again, these are middle-aged people mostly. The consultant says that changing the mindset of the farmers is very difficult. They do not believe that nature can take care of feeding the world. You know, they're products of the Green Revolution. They're not. They just don't believe that you can do this without chemicals. And this farmer says we were very reliant on phosphate and chemicals to make sure that we could maintain our production. So it's a big leap to try to let go of all that and trust that nature, if you really work at it, and it takes a while, the steep learning curve. You know, these people that have been doing it for 10, 20, 30 years, it was hard at first, but now they're in a great place. And then also the peer pressure. You know, most people don't do this, so when you do, this farmer points out that as far as society is concerned, there's an element of, because we've stepped outside the box, we're regarded as being rather quirky in the district, and that has its downsides. You know, people have to make new friends and have new peers and develop new communities of practice. And some of them get really into microscope groups where they convene with other people who have similar interests, and they all bring soil samples and bring wine, and they get together and they compare notes and they cheer each other on. But it's a big change, you know, socially, psychologically, as well as just the nuts and bolts of what you're doing on your property. Okay, next one. So just to summarize what I've talked about here, farmers can play an important role in planetary recovery through adoption of regenerative agriculture. Learning about the microbiome inspires biophilic emotions, strengthens farmers' connections to nature, and motivates them to continue on the regenerative pathway, but transition is quite challenging. What are the implications for like our policymakers or the USDA or people that might have an interest in trying to promote this? Well, all the excitement about carbon markets and different payments for ecosystem services schemes, that's great, that's probably necessary, but it's definitely not sufficient. There's a real need for that we need to make sure there's funding for assistance to help people with understanding and managing the system. These networks and communities of practice, opportunities for social learning are really important. Those need to be set up in different communities all over the place, maybe by NRCS, you know, that might be the agency that would do this sort of thing. And then finally, we have a role to play. We need to cultivate food systems with tight feedbacks, you know, and consumers need to be educated so that they want to go out and buy regenerative products. You know, there's a new certification scheme, ROC, Regenerative Organic Certification. It might be a little bit hard to track down, but you can find it in places. A lot of times if you go to farmers markets, some of the people there will be practicing regenerative. You can just go on the internet and Google and find out who's doing regenerative agriculture in my area. And you can tighten those feedbacks by going and meeting that farmer or that rancher and buying their food and seeing how they're producing their food and making that connection. My husband orders grass-finished beef from Alder Springs Ranch in Idaho, and the ranchers put out a newsletter every month, and my husband always reads it as soon as it comes in. He's so excited learning about what's happening on the ranch, and he feels like he knows the rancher and his 7 daughters, and they all have a role in the ranch, and so yeah, he gets excited about it, and then he feels good about the purchase that he just made when he buys the meat. So let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, I think. I think there's a quote here I couldn't fit on here, but this is from a farmer talking about how can we scale this up. And he says, getting people more interested in understanding the whole cycle. People in the city need to know more about the soil and the complexity and how that affects what they're eating. We need to go out and say, this food is coming from an aware farmer, a carbon farmer. So finally, just next slide, some points to ponder. The first one, I'm just going to give you this quote from Paul Hawken in his book Regeneration, which I think is really wonderful. He says, regeneration means bringing the earth back to life. And when you bring the earth back to life, you bring yourself back to life. You bring your family and friends back to life. So I just want to hope that inspires you to think about the ways that you can practice regeneration. If you have a little garden in your backyard, maybe try doing things without the if you're using synthetic fertilizer or chemicals, try experimenting with compost. You can practice regeneration in your communities, amongst your friends, amongst your families. Just interesting terms, kind of taking the place of sustainability, because some people are critical of sustainability. Sustainability kind of suggests like, all right, we're just going to keep it the way it's been. We're just going to keep sustaining. But the fact is, the way it's been isn't that great. So sustainability for some is like, why would you want to sustain this current system? This is not a good system. We need regeneration that's constantly like evolving and getting better and better and better and better, more and more and more and more life. All right, next point is I hope that this kind of gets you thinking about what are some ways to strengthen the experience of our biophilic tendencies and make it a tenet of everyday life. So I would just like to think, does anybody have any ideas? Or maybe some of you already do this. Maybe you already are, devout biophilic tendency cultivators. Yeah, what are some things that we can do to cultivate? Yeah.
Well, one of the things we can do is bring the arts in so that people, not just here, but all over the place, are more in tune with the awe that is inspired by nature. I'm thinking particularly as an example of, I think, the movie from 2003 or so, Winged Migration.
Oh yeah.
Remember that movie?
Yeah.
Do you remember the heart-stopping scene of, I think they're harvesting wheat with these big machines, and what is it, rabbits or something, they're in the way and you just get mowed over?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. You can grab people by the heart.
Yeah, art science collaborations are really important, and I'm really excited about the prospect for those. I'm involved in the long-term ecological research program in Oregon at the HJM at the Experimental Forest, and we have a big art science collaboration program there. And yeah, because a lot of times scientists, they get up and they talk about regenerative agriculture and soil carbon sequestration, and it's like not very inspiring. But then the artist can kind of come and interpret what the scientist is saying and actually get people excited about it, or writing about it, or writing that's what Paul Hawkins is good at. He writes really well in a way that makes this scientific stuff pretty accessible. I'm still a novice at it. I'm trying to learn how to speak to general audiences. I mostly only speak to academic audiences. So, but it's a really important skill to be able to communicate through art, through writing, poetry. What are some other ideas? Yeah.
Just encouraging people to slow down when they're outside and sit quietly and just observe.
Or maybe even put their phone down while they're outside or while they're walking, instead of walking with your phone, to actually walk without your phone and notice things. Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah, you never know what you're going to observe, even if you're not in Yosemite. Maybe you're just walking down the street in San Francisco and you'll see some really cool things. Yeah, what are some other ideas?
Or even just going in your own backyard or your own park
Yeah.
in the same place every day.
Yeah. I have a gratitude journal. And I go out and meditate on my back deck every morning, about 20 minutes, and just sit out there and then I write, to practice I'm doing, I write 5 things I'm grateful for every day. I write a few sentences, I don't just list things, I actually have a writing exercise. And often it ends up just being like the sound of the birds, or like the trees are so pretty, or that the breeze this morning is so nice. So it's sort of like working on strengthening your gratitude muscle, and I think that can be helpful. I have a friend who thanks her coffee every morning. And she thinks about the beans and how they were produced and harvested and just how good they make her feel, and it tastes so yummy. And she just I need to, as I'm stirring it up in the French press, I think, thank you. I don't know. Any other thoughts or ideas on how we can? I mean, obviously, keep doing your bird walks, right? And
I think,
in the
on
park.
that note, building community around these things, like bringing other people in and showing them how cool something is, like a new flower you've never seen before, or look what's in this soil after it rains, or anything. I think that's one of the keys to making things really stick. Community.
Yeah.
Naturalist community.
Yeah, and ongoing learning opportunities.
Yeah.
And Parsons Lodge series, great idea. Yeah. All
And
right.
get them
Well,
while they're young.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, and so YI Nature Bridge, I think, is still a good idea. All right, let's go to the next one. In fact, I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to bring a whole bunch of farmers and ranchers to Nature Bridge?
It would, let's collaborate.
All right, let's go to the next one. I just want to, I don't want to be all like kumbaya, rose-colored glasses. The fact is that when you do feel really connected to nature, as you all know, the companions to awe and wonder are fear and worry. And every day you read the news about some horrible thing happening to poor Mother Earth, and whether it's a fire or a flood or hurricane or some heat wave or drought, or people suffering all over. And it's a sort of a liability of feeling connected to nature. It's kind of like when you have a kid, you put your heart on your sleeve. It's fun having a kid, but you're setting yourself up for a lot of pain and suffering too. I've got a backpack plan for a permit for August 26th due out of Mono Pass down by Bishop. And I'm kind of like trying not to get too excited about it, because several of my trips in the last couple of years have been canceled due to fire and smoke. So trying not to, I'm excited about it, but sort of tempering that excitement. So you need to find a balance so that you're not constantly being whipsawed and being too vulnerable. But last one would be, I just want to end with this idea that I think that what I presented here is sort of an exciting idea, that doing good for the planet can actually be positive and rewarding, versus costly or unenjoyable. Because so often sustainability is portrayed as something that we have to suffer through. It's going to be a chore. We're going to lose a lot of money. It's not going to be fun. We'll be living in dark caves, but we need to be sustainable. Versus making it like, oh, it could be really fun. Maybe it'll even be better. And I think Rob Hopkins, who started the Transition Town movement, is someone who's a really great advocate for that, about the importance of telling stories about examples where doing good was actually pretty fun, and made things better. So we need more of those stories and models, I think. And then last slide, I think, is just if you're interested in this topic and you want to subject yourself to the academese version of this talk, I have the article here, and I'm happy to email it or send a PDF if anyone who wants it. This is another one for 2019 about a similar topic, but just broader set of findings, not just the interior stuff, but more of the institutional and policy stuff and systemic stuff. This article, it was interesting. The journal Sustainability Science tends to be focused more on like the behavior and the institutions and the policy and how can we make things more sustainable. But for this special issue, they wanted to focus on the how of transformation. They were calling for integrative approaches to sustainability. So I submitted my article to this special issue. But it's interesting that within academia, just to give you a little snapshot of academia, the stuff I was talking about today, I probably would not talk about the stuff I talked about today at an academic conference, because it's sort of out there for academia, but that's a problem. This stuff's important, but it's not fully accepted, and so this special issue is trying to bring some more of that in. It says the papers in this issue all acknowledge the importance of structural and systems change for achieving results, like having the right university program and the right incentives and the right payment schemes and the right training and outreach and extension. But they also recognize the importance of the subjective or interior dimensions of transformation, emphasizing how these influence both politics and practices. Integrative approaches can be considered a prerequisite for understanding how we can transform in a manner that's not only rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented, but also equitable, ethical, and sustainable. We don't want to just we're just going to give you $7,000, go transition. We want people to enjoy it and want to do it, because so that when the money's not there, they still want to do it anyway. So that's the danger of paying. I think Aldo Leopold made that point a while back. The danger of paying people to do conservation is that then when you take the money away, maybe they go back to their old ways. So it's much better to kind of try to plant the seed in them to make them really want to do it. And it's not easy. Anyway, so that's it. I just last slide is just for questions. I'm happy to interact with you guys over email or